Welcome to Personhood Florida's monthly live stream here on Facebook and YouTube. We are an organization that's working to protect every innocent human life, and today we have an exciting video where we're going to be talking about whether the One Big Beautiful Bill Act actually defunded Planned Parenthood. And we're going to talk about and actually even show you a graph that shows the amount of federal funding that Planned Parenthood receives. And I think you're going to see on this, it also shows the number of abortions that Planned Parenthood has done per year. And you're going to see that as they have received more money in federal funding, they have actually performed more abortions. We also are going to talk about the funding levels of Planned Parenthood, the federal funding, the amount they receive from federal tax dollars, your tax dollars, prior to the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. We'll talk about the possible effects of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act on defunding Planned Parenthood for 1 year. Also, the exceptions that are in the bill that still allow Planned Parenthood to receive money under certain circumstances. And then the current status, which includes the Planned Parenthood court challenge and the injunction. So I'm going to turn it over. I'm actually going to switch over to a full screen. And what we'll do is we'll actually bring on, we're joined here with Jay Rogers. And Jay Rogers is the president of Personhood Florida Education. I'm the president of Personhood Florida. We have Wanda Cohn, who's our secretary. And we also have Ricardo Davis. He's from Georgia Right to Life, and he's been a champion fighting for the protection of innocent human life in our neighboring state as well. A lot of wisdom there. And he's been working on defunding Planned Parenthood in his area as well. Jay is going to present, though, first a chart that is going to show us the real effects of the funding of Planned Parenthood on the number of abortions that they perform.
Okay, so one of the things that Planned Parenthood will tell you is they'll tell you that none of the federal funds that they receive go towards abortion. They go toward things like pregnancy tests and STD tests and different things like that to really help people. And that if federal funding is cut, then women would lose these services. I even saw an article today in The Hill. The Hill is somewhat of I would say a right-leaning conservative outlet, although they have people from different points of view, really lambasting the big beautiful bill for cutting all these women's services. So you wonder, sometimes you get people on the right even that get pulled into this. But what I wanted to do is show you just real briefly here. I'm going to share a screen, and this is a report, fact sheet on Planned Parenthood. And let's see if I can. Okay, so this is the fact sheet on Planned Parenthood. This is from the Charlotte, I don't know how you say this, Lozier Institute. And this is from Planned Parenthood's 2023-2024 annual report. The 2024-2025 report is not available yet. Okay, so this goes on and tells you about how Planned Parenthood performed a record 402,230 abortion, an increase of over 2% from the previous year, and an increase of 23% since 2013. Okay. This goes on. The main thing I wanted to show you is this graph right here. And what I did was I took a screenshot of this graph. Now, if you notice, if you go all the way back to 2011, the total government revenue, in other words, federal funding to Planned Parenthood, was roughly at about $600 million, so $0.6 billion. And in 2024, in the gray here, what was the number, Brian, that we said? 796?
792.
792,000. So
792 million.
792 million. So close to 0.8 billion. So that's quite a jump. and that's all taxpayer funded. Okay, however they get their money, the printing money or whatever, taxpayer funded or just government giving them. So, and then if you notice the number of abortions, this is in tens of thousands. So when we see that 3.5, what that is that's 350 million. So it was slightly under 350 million, and then today it's up to sorry, 350,000. Excuse me, 350,000 abortions per year, and that's out of the total number of abortions in America that year. And even though the total number of abortions have decreased since 2011, the number of abortions that Planned Parenthood has been performing have gone up. So now it's roughly at 400,000. So over half of the abortions that are recorded as abortions that are reported to the federal government are performed by Planned Parenthood. At the same time, the number of patients that they've been seeing has really plummeted. It's gone from, let's see, it'd be 30 times, so 3 million down to about 2 million. Okay, and this is what this report says here. So, we'll put the links to this. People can look at this for themselves. But that's the result of tax money. Now, when Planned Parenthood says that, well, we don't use federal funding for abortion, one thing you have to remember is that all money is fungible. And what that means is that when you, for instance, if you were to run a business and your revenue for your business was, $600,000 a year, and I came along and said, well, guess what? We're going to give you a grant, and we're going to give you, $400,000 a year, but you can't use it for this. That doesn't really matter because you could just move some of the money that you were already paying for that particular thing over to other things that you'd like to do. So essentially, even though that money supposedly does not go directly to abortions, it frees Planned Parenthood up to get people into the clinic. It gets young girls in there to get birth control. And when they get birth control, obviously they let them know we also offer abortion services. It lets them go out to schools, send out, hire a representative to go out to high schools like we have in Orange County here or in Orlando, to go out and talk to students about, and they're not supposed to talk about abortion, but we've seen how they get around that. So there's all kinds of things that Planned Parenthood can do with that money to get people into the clinic, and then that allows them to perform more abortions. The other thing I wanted to mention real briefly here is that even the other thing Planned Parenthood will say is, I said, well, only about 3 or 4% or 2% of our services that we offer are abortions. But if you go to a 990 form, like I did that with there was a clinic here in Orlando, Central Florida, Planned Parenthood. I looked at their 990 forms, and I saw that about 1/3 of their revenue, in other words, 1/3 of the money that they had coming in, came in from surgical services. Okay, so even though they'll say, well, only 2 or 3% of the services that we offer, the percentage of the money that's coming in, a very large portion of that is from abortion. So what we're doing is we're funding Planned Parenthood to stay in business, to perform all of these services. And then what they're able to do with that is they're able to leverage that to be able to get a lot of money in performing surgical abortion, chemical abortion, and so on. And so people need to be aware of that. And so, yes, go ahead.
So what we've seen is the number of patients they're serving going down by really about 33%. The amount of money that they're receiving going up, and at the same time the amount of money that they're receiving going up, you also see the amount of abortions, the number of abortions that they're doing. Also, it's almost you see really a rise in the number of abortions that they are performing.
Yeah, exactly. That's the graph that we're looking at right now. So I'll put up links for this for people to see this
And what
in the video
percentage,
description.
we can put that in the description of these videos also on Facebook and YouTube. And just if you're watching this on Facebook, the video won't be there for long on Facebook. It'll only be there for about 30 days, but the video will be there in perpetual over here on over on YouTube. And Ricardo has something to share from George Grant's book. Go ahead, Ricardo.
Yes. So when you all were talking about that, I remember George Grant's book, Grand Illusions, that I guess I got the first edition. The second edition, which came out in 1992, addressed this issue in particular. And the quote, I think, is the money quote. Now, again, think about this. This was 1992. This was the status quo. And I quote, "What is not widely known, however, is that those Title X appropriations represent only a small portion of Planned Parenthood's taxpayer largesse. There are some 18 additional federal statutes, as well as hundreds of state and local measures that authorize public expenditures and support for, quote, family planning, unquote, programs, policies, and procedures. So, for instance, even during the, quote, pro-life, unquote, Republican administrations, Planned Parenthood clinics, affiliates, and chapters received annual federal funding under the $17 million Title V provision of the Social Security Maternal and Child Health Program. Each year, they received federal funding under the $9 million Medicaid Appropriations Bill, and that's primarily what we've been talking about with the One Big Beautiful Bill. In addition, those clinics, affiliates, and chapters benefited each year from the government's $8 million contraceptive development splurge, its $3 million expenditure for contraceptive evaluation projects, its $66 million spending spree for, quote, reproductive sciences, unquote, its $14 million spent on demographic and behavioral research, and its $27 million budgeted for community services block grants. And I could go on just talking about their international money that comes in. And he closes by saying this is a lot of money. And that's a lot of money, a lot of your money, and a lot of my money. And it's getting worse with each passing moment. Planned Parenthood is not, by any stretch of the imagination, a privately funded, nonprofit family planning organization. It instead is one of the largest, if not the largest, publicly funded multinational collectives the world has ever seen. We simply cannot pretend otherwise.
And Planned Parenthood, those figures are 33 to 35 years old, so then the amounts,
exactly.
those amounts of funding have gone up over the years. And so when we're looking at the One Big Beautiful Bill, originally the House version did have the defunding of Planned Parenthood, or the defunding of organizations that support abortion for 10 years. In the Senate version, that was reduced to 1 year. And so we don't really know, what's going to happen after that. We pro-lifers, we are going to need to hold our U.S. House members and U.S. senators' feet to the fire to continue to defund Planned Parenthood. But there also are exceptions in the funding of Planned Parenthood, or the funding of abortion, and what the government will pay for. And these include not only the life of the mother, but also the health of the mother as well. And health can be a very broadly defined term, and we don't know who is going to. You had some good questions about this, Ricardo, earlier, coming up with, who's going to define what standards, what organizations are going to be paid, how they're going to be paid. How are we going to determine this?
That's correct. And quite frankly, as pro-life organizations, we need to be laser focused on getting answers to those questions.
Yes. Yes. Do you want to just go over some of those questions that you presented earlier?
I'll be glad to. So, for example, number one, what does the law amend the criteria, or how does the law amend the criteria by which organizations are prohibited from receiving reimbursements? In other words, I want to see the before and after. And you already mentioned one in terms of the carve-outs. Second item I had a question about was, what are the requirements used to identify the prohibited organizations? In other words, how do they come within the purview of being rejected? Next question is, what are the qualifications by which prohibited activity, in this case we're talking about elective abortions, are allowable for reimbursement? And you mentioned one of the biggest loopholes, that is the health of the mother. Another question I would have would be, who or what organization can make a claim that an organization should be prohibited from receiving reimbursement? And what does that process look like to bring a challenge? In other words, can we as, you as Personhood Florida down there, us up here at Georgia Right to Life, here in Georgia, can we as organizations challenge in either an Article 3 court or an administrative court abortion providers that are misusing our taxpayer funds? And another question I have along those lines is, which role within the federal government agency overseeing the disbursement of funds will make the determination as to whether or not an organization is prohibited from reimbursement from Medicaid, for example? Because it's one thing to say, oh, well, we made a law and it's prohibitive. I want to know who's responsible for overseeing it so that I can track to see whether or not they're doing their job. And I think the last question I had was, does the prohibited organization have the right to an administrative appeal? And what are the details of that process? So again, if I bring an administrative challenge on behalf of Georgia Right to Life against, let's say, the Planned Parenthood down in Cobb County, then does Planned Parenthood have the right to an administrative appeal? And what does the process look like so that I know if they essentially initiate that process, then I have an idea of what I must do to defend my position and hold their feet to the fire.
Yes. Those are some really good questions, and a lot of this we really don't know the answer. And another thing you're thinking about, a lot of times we hear about the deep state.
Yes.
You have you have Congress that makes the laws, but the laws are administered by agencies. And one of the things that we've seen in the last 10 years is that there are a lot of people in these agencies. We even see it in Florida, which is a very red state. We even see people in these agencies that could be pro-abortion. So when you have someone in an agency that's pro-abortion and is either looking the other way or approving things that really shouldn't be approved, approving funding that really shouldn't be approved, could that happen? And certainly it could happen, and we're going to need to hold the Congress's feet to the fire, and really, pray for exposure of wickedness and exposure of corruption, and that type of thing. And I had a question.
Some of these programs, like for example the block grants, those are ones where you not only have the federal government involved, right? But you also have your state government. So
Yes.
whatever state agency is essentially involved in dispersing those funds, we need to have the same level of Doge. We need to have the same level of effective appointments and oversight
Sure.
so that we can ensure that those administrators down the line that are reviewing these grants and reviewing these disbursements are indeed doing their job to prohibit organizations that are providing elective abortions from receiving those funds.
And when you start thinking about states like California and New York and some of the other leaning states that have even said we're going to use state funds. If you want to get an abortion, you can't get an abortion in your state. We will actually pay for you to travel to our state to have an abortion. I mean, that's just evil when you're talking about what abortion is. It's ripping a baby limb from limb, crushing that baby's skull. There are other ways that babies are killed through abortion as well. But
so how come we don't have a racketeering action here? Well, I don't know if you can use RICO against a government agency, but we all know that, you have not just these elective abortion providers, but also various levels of either state or local government working in tandem to ensure that the slaughter of these preborn children continue.
It's really sad. And when I was in Atlanta as a missionary to the preborn, I was actually arrested on the sidewalk praying because the police were working basically on behalf of the abortion clinics to actually arrest pro-lifers that were not even blocking the doors, that were just there praying on the sidewalk, peacefully praying on the sidewalk. We were even thrown into solitary confinement for having Bible studies in jail. And so even in a conservative state, even in a right-leaning state, it's important for everyone listening, whether you're in a liberal state or a conservative state, to realize that your voice has an impact and you need to stand up and you need to make sure that you're voting for pro-life legislators and that you're holding their feet to the fire, and that you're also holding their feet to the fire not only with the laws that they pass or don't pass, but also with the people that they appoint in these agencies to make sure that this money is not going to fund organizations that make their money on killing innocent human life.
Agreed. And this is why personhood education is important, as we can provide that information to not just our supporters, but the general public. It gives us, for example, here in Georgia, as one of the Personhood Alliance affiliates, it not only provides us to kind of set the stage for the discussion. In other words, we want to frame the debate, but also it gives us an opportunity not just to educate, especially individuals running for constitutional statewide office, like the governor, lieutenant governor, the attorney general, and other related offices, that they need to realize that gone are the days when you will get a rubber stamp pro-life helmet sticker just because you have an R behind your name. We want to know, we need to see the same kind of shock and awe that President Trump brought to the table in his first 100 days. We need to see that same kind of shock and awe at the state level.
Yes, to protect innocent human life.
Yes.
I have a question at this point. I wanted to ask Ricardo. I'm going to put up on screen your questions that you asked. Can we get quotes from the law itself? In other words, you were talking about the Big Beautiful Bill, and the Big Beautiful Bill has provisions in it that would defund organizations that provide abortion. And you listed all of these wonderful questions here. And then you were sharing something with me earlier. You were saying that my concern is that most pro-life organizations are not willing to ask these type of questions. I don't want to put you on the spot here, but could you explain what you mean by that specifically?
Well, what I mean specifically by that is that for far too long, we've had a distortion of the political environment where we have organizations that are really more, let's just say they are patronized by the political powers that be in state and local government, as opposed to these supposed pro-life organizations essentially being patronized by the people. In other words, those individuals who are essentially giving their blood, sweat, and tears and funds, thinking that in giving to organizations, they are working to end the killing of preborn children. But what's happening is we just keep electing primarily Republican officials that essentially just keep kicking the can down the road. In other words, there's not the level of courageous action where it can be taken. You know, people always talk about, oh, well, politics is the art of the possible. Well, you know what, ladies and gentlemen, ever since I was part of the Reagan Revolution in the 80s, the Republicans have been talking about defunding programs, shutting down, for example, the Department of Education. And how long did it take for a Republican to have the guts to do it? That's what I'm talking about, Jay. We need to demand more, which means we need to make sure that, especially amongst the Personhood Alliance affiliates, we are helping educate the public as to how things actually get done, and then show them how their current elected government is underperforming regarding their expectations.
Would you also say that there are some pro-life organizations that are giving a false sense of victory, that, well, we just defunded Planned Parenthood? And in reality, it's a little bit too early to say what has happened because we don't know yet, but what do you think has happened? Have we defunded Planned Parenthood already?
Well, no. We will know. It's like, how's the old saying go? If you chunk a rock into a pack of dogs, the one that whelps is the one that got hit. Well, we will know when the financial screws are really being turned on Planned Parenthood, because they will loose the hounds to do everything they can to protect their federal funding. So from my estimation, it's way too early to claim victory. Just like, for example, with the laws that were passed either shortly before or shortly after Dobbs, and in particular when those laws survived all their constitutional challenges after Dobbs, that everyone was claiming. You remember that picture of George Bush on the aircraft carrier with the big banner saying "Mission Accomplished"?
Yes.
Well, see, here in Georgia, with regard to our current abortion restrictions, all we do is just show the graph of the state of Georgia's own statistics that show that after our Life Act survived its challenges with regards to its abortion restrictions, has not slowed down the increase of abortions here in the state of Georgia. So again, that's part of the what I call and I'm not here to, essentially badmouth people. What I'm trying to do is help people understand that, what they think and what they've heard, whether directly or indirectly, isn't what's happening. And I'll give you a quick example. We were at the 2025 Georgia GOP State Convention. Georgia Right to Life had an exhibitor booth there. And we were presenting this. We had a big billboard that essentially illustrated what has been happening since 2002 here in the state of Georgia. And I kid you not, there were people, and these are like the cream of the crop GOP activists. They have, as it were, gone through the gauntlet to become delegates. They've spent quite a bit of money to participate in the process. And some of them, when they saw the big poster board illustrating the increase in abortions here in Georgia, their breath was taken away.
Wow.
They thought, and I kid you not, there was a doctor that was there that came by, and she was beside herself when we showed her where the stats came from the Department of Public Health.
Wow. Wanda, I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about the health of the mother, the life of the mother, these exceptions. Is there ever a reason why a preborn child in the womb should be sliced limb from limb and have her skull crushed to save the mother's life?
The answer to that is no. There's never a reason to have to do that. There's many doctors that have said that that have supported that, that there's never been a need to be able to have to do that. And as long as, and a lot of people get kind of hung up on the, what about the mother, we're putting the baby in front of the mother, and God's word doesn't say to do that either. We're to treat everyone equally. And I think that as far as women who have some health risk, as long as the doctor's trying to save both the mother and the baby, it's not even, my understanding is, not even really considered, quote, abortion, as long as he's trying to save both of them. And in any of those cases, to tear apart a baby is never going to be easier on a mother's health. Right. Even in a case where there's where some intervention's needed. But I think there's a big misnomer there, and people are afraid to support no exceptions because they're afraid women are going to be dying because of this, and that's just not true.
So
I think the opposite.
There are times where a baby may need to be delivered prematurely, right?
Right.
But
right.
that's very
Yes.
different than purposely killing the baby. And
Well,
real
see-
doctors try to save both lives.
Both of
Well,
them.
see,
Yes.
because we need to make sure, let's make this very easy for people. When you want to talk about whether or not there's a complicated pregnancy, you need to start out by saying there are two patients,
Yes.
the baby and the mother. And good ethical medicine tries to preserve the health and life of both
Right.
the patients.
Well, isn't the baby defined as the second patient in the OB journals and texts? It calls them a second patient. So
Yes.
you're not supposed to kill a second patient. That's not ethical.
And Dr. Lyle certainly presents that. So, and either Ricardo or Jay, if you guys could comment on the current status of funding with what has happened with Planned Parenthood challenging this bill in the courts.
I'll say something real briefly about that. I think that the real answer is we don't know. We know that there was 20-something million dollars, depending on which report that you want to listen to, that was immediately cut because of DEI. and maybe Ricardo would like to comment a little bit on that, but DEI basically is diversity, equity, and inclusion. For instance, in a school, in a university campus, a public high school, maybe the teachers will be brought into a room and there's federal funding given to educate the teacher about how they can be more inclusive in their instruction, that type of thing. So there's a certain amount of federal funding that goes toward that. And so Donald Trump, to his credit, pointed out, and many of his supporters obviously as well, have pointed out that this is just part of the whole woke agenda, that this is a way of basically trying to indoctrinate us to extend rights endlessly, and along with these rights come federal funds. So there's special interest groups, and usually liberal special interest groups, that are able to raise money off of this and actually get federal funding. So it becomes like what I call a self-licking ice cream cone. After a while, the idea there is that the money itself goes into programs that indoctrinate people. It makes it so that it's unthinkable not to be inclusive of, transgender students or something like that. Whereas a few years ago, many people would have been very skeptical about that. And so with abortion, the same thing is happening. So that type of those type of educational programs, DEI, and I'm not sure exactly how the funding was allocated, but mainly it was Medicare funding that went toward those types of programs. And that's been cut immediately, but we don't know about the other $792 million.
Well, specifically, Planned Parenthood, Donald Trump signed this on July 4th, which was a Friday, and on Monday, Planned Parenthood filed an appeal, or filed a case in court.
Right. They sought a temporary restraining order. They found a friendly judge, Tawani, over in the District of Massachusetts, and she granted a temporary restraining order the Monday after, directing the Department of Health and Human Services to ensure that Medicaid funding continues to be dispersed.
And was this injunction only for the citizens under her jurisdiction, or was this one of those nationwide injunctions where a local judge or a federal judge that is supposed to be over just a certain region actually impacts the entire nation?
Well, I'm sure you probably won't be surprised that it is the latter. Now, here's I guess you could say, the part of the silver lining with all of this is that it's a temporary injunction. It lasts for just 2 weeks. And in particular, the hearing, the last I heard, the hearing where the judge will rule whether or not to extend the injunction was supposed to be today. I haven't had a chance to follow up on that to see whether that hearing actually was had. And quite frankly, I'm hoping that somehow, some way, the Department of Justice is going to step up to the plate and deal rightfully with this before the U.S. Supreme Court.
But right now, the funding is continuing, and it's possible that the funding may continue. This $792 million a year may very well continue until or unless this goes up to the U.S. Supreme Court, and the U.S. Supreme Court strikes down this judge, if they indeed do strike down this judge. Hopefully they will. But how long could that take? Could they kick the ball down, the can down the road? They're not even in session for a while. They're not going to be in session for a while, I don't think. I've never really known them to come back to session just for a particular case. Well,
see, this is why when we were chatting about this earlier, this really is about running out the clock.
Yes.
Doing whatever they can legally to tie it up in court so that they can continue, as long as they can get a favorable judge that will allow them essentially an injunction that will allow the funding until the case is litigated.
Because you're looking at $792 million cut for 1 year with certain exceptions. So we don't know how much of that's still going to be allowed or not, after that ban is in place. We know that probably some of it's going to be allowed during that time. We don't know how much is going to be allowed during that time, but $792 million is cut for 1 year, and currently the cut is not in effect at all. And so what you're going to have is really the funding continuing as the case is fought out in the court. And what portion of that 1 year ban is this going to be fought in the court? We don't know how long this will actually be fought. Could it be that we spend quite a bit of that year actually trying to decide whether they're going to receive the funding or not? And right now they're receiving the funding.
Well, I think, Brian, in particular, now is the time for us in the states to turn up the heat on our attorney general's offices.
Yes.
And as well, because you know what? I mean, yes, everybody wants to focus on the federal stuff. We need our attorney generals to come up to the plate and say, you know what? The Supreme Court has already struck down this kind of over-the-top, unconstitutional behavior. We need to make sure that, you know what? All our states, especially those states, I might add, who have attorneys general who are holding themselves out as pro-life candidates, either for re-election or for election. And we need to have them say, hey, are you going to put your name on the line in calling for action to deal swiftly with this unconstitutional injunction?
That's right. And we want to thank everyone for joining in and watching this video. Please share this with your friends. Please share it with your, all of your friends. Share it on social media. We are Personhood Florida. And I know if you're listening in another state, maybe you're watching in another state, Ricardo's from Georgia. There are groups like ours in states throughout this country. If you want to be involved in ending abortion in your county, in your state, in this nation, contact us. You can comment in the comment sections on our live videos. You can also send us a message on Facebook. You can go to our website, personhoodflorida.com. You can email us from there. And we want to encourage you to stand for the protection of every innocent human life, and really to stand for defunding Planned Parenthood. We have shown in this video, in this presentation, we have shown that there is a clear and direct correlation to the amount of federal funding that Planned Parenthood receives and the number of abortions they provide. And they are the leading abortion provider in the nation and even in the world. And I can tell you, from my standpoint, I don't want one penny of my tax dollars going to fund Planned Parenthood. If you want to be involved in what we're doing, we definitely encourage you to pray, but also connect with us. Go to our website, personhoodfl.com. Send us a message. Send us an email from there. Message us on Facebook. Comment in the live videos on Facebook and YouTube. If you're watching this after the fact, you can still comment. You can still get in contact with us, and join us in the effort to defund Planned Parenthood and to protect every innocent human life in our area. We want to encourage you to join us also, and again, share this with others as well.
And